From here you get a bird's eye view of a business that's going lickety-split. Where it happened was cotton and tobacco went sick, and it was either fish or cut bait. There was no question which I'd do. I'd turn this plantation into a breeding farm. And I must say it was a timely move, because right after that they passed a new law prohibiting the importation of African Negroes. And of course that sent the market sky high.
Pa! Hey, Pa! Mr. Wilson's coming!
Hey there, Mr. Bighorn. I brought my winch.
All right, fetch her here. You've been keeping track of her. You're sure she's in heat?
She's ready for breeding.
Well, I hope so for your sake. You know, Wilson, if she doesn't take the first time, you're not going to like paying another stud fee. How many days ago did she finish?
My missus counted 12. Should be 13 at most with the trip. You can get her mounted right away. I'll be back on the road in a couple hours.
Is it for me, Pa?
Easy. We'll talk about that when you finish school. Now you go and study.
Doggone.
Is she clean?
Sure enough.
Does she have crabs?
For the love of God, I keep her in the house.
Then she's a virgin?
Of course. You know I've been saving her for Jason.
What? A virgin for a brute like that? He'll split her up the middle.
He does, I'll sew her up. Come on, Mr. Bighorn. I could have serviced this wench 2 feet from my own back door for $50. If I've traveled 60 miles up country, and I'm paying you $200 cash on the barrelhead, it means I want Jason's seed. Anyway, it's my risk the way I see it.
Peace, family. It's your brother YK The Truth. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about a history of the slave breeding industry in the United States. See, a lot of so-called aboriginals, and I gotta say so-called because there's no proof that they are aboriginal. There's no proof that they are indigenous to this land. So I have to say so-called. Now, a lot of these so-called aboriginals can't seem to understand how 350,000 to 400,000 African people can turn into the millions of people that's on this land today. Okay? This is their main argument. How can those people multiply that fast? So in this video, I'm going to be going over a brief history of slave breeding because they don't understand slave breeding. So here it goes, family. Now, this is a book called The American Slave Coast, A History of Slave Breeding Industry by Nell and Constance Sublettes. Is a book which offers an alternative view of slavery in the United States. Instead of treating slavery as a source of unpaid labor, as it is typically understood, they focus on an ownership aspect. People as property, merchandise, collateral, and capital. See, you don't understand. Our ancestors were like stock. They were like chattel. Okay? So let's get into it. Let's get into it, family. Let's get all of these so-called aboriginal theories out of here. We're going for their foundation. After a while, it won't be nothing left for them to stand on. So let's go. In fact, most American slaves were not kidnapped on another continent, though over 12.7 million Africans were forced onto ships to the Western Hemisphere. Estimates only have 400,000 to 500,000 landing in present-day America. How then to account for the 4 million black slaves who were tilled in fields in 1860? The South, Sublettes writes, did not only produce tobacco, rice, sugar, and cotton as commodities for sale, it produced people. There were laws that came into place that forbid the slave trade. So these people needed a way to still produce these slaves, to still produce our ancestors at an increase. So let's keep going. Slavers called slave breeding natural increase, but there was nothing natural about producing slaves. It took scientific management. Thomas Jefferson bragged to George Washington that the birth of black children was increasing Virginia's capital stock by 4% annually. Annually. So these people knew that slavery was a big business. If you don't have no slaves, you don't have no money. So slave breeding was something that they did to produce more slaves. Do you not understand this? Here's how it works. Here is how the American slave breeding industry worked. According to Sublettes, some states, most importantly Virginia, produced slaves as their main domestic crop. The price of slaves was anchored by industry in other states that consumed slaves in the production of rice and sugar and constant territorial expansion. As long as the slave power continued to grow, breeders could literally bank on future demand and increasing prices. So we was like stock market. Look what it says. It says the slaves not just a commodity, but the closest thing to money that white breeders had. Do you follow me? Do you understand, you so-called Aboriginal? Do you understand that it was big business to produce these African slaves? So I don't want to hear that shit, you dummy, about, well, how did you turn 350,000? Our ancestors was considered chattel slavery. How the fuck do you raise a farm and grow cow? How the hell does America feed all of these people? How do they feed all of these people with these animals? They breed them. They select them. So let's keep going, family. Let's keep going. That made slaves not just a commodity, but the closest thing to money that white breeders had. It's hard to quantify just how valuable people were as commodity, but the Sublettes tried to convey it. By a conservative estimate, in 1860, the total value of American slaves was $4 billion. Far more than the gold and silver than circulating nationally at 228 million. Most of it in the North. And even the value of South's total farmland, 1.92 billion. Slaves were to slavers worth more than anything else they can imagine combined. So what the hell are you talking about? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? How did these people turn into from 350,000 to millions? They were bred. Okay? Virginia slave owners won a major victory when Thomas Jefferson's 1808 prohibition of the slave trade protected domestic slave markets for breeding. For breeding. Do you understand? Now here it goes. Because slaves were property, Southern slave owners could mortgage them to banks. And then the banks could package the mortgages into bonds and sell the bonds to anyone everywhere in the world, even when slavery was illegal. Illegal. So we are taking them, we giving them this work. We are giving these aboriginals, so-called aboriginals, these work because they have a whole bunch of questions, but they don't have any answers. So YK gonna get them the answers. Let's go. So you have these so-called aboriginals that say things like, how did these slaves produce enough breast milk to feed these babies if they was having these babies at a time. So let's go into it. Let's go into slave breeding. Let's educate these fools. All right? We can only educate. We're not going to give our opinion about something or our assumption. We're going to give them facts, historical facts. Okay, let's go. All right, so here goes. The death rate among slaves was high. To replace their losses, plantation owners encouraged the slaves to have children. Childbearing started around the age of 13, and by 20, the women slave would be expected to have 4 or 5 children. To encourage childbearing, some population owners promised women slaves their freedom after they had produced 15 children. Let me repeat that for you pseudo so-called aboriginals. It said childbearing started around the age of 13, and by 20, the woman slaves would be expected to have 4 or 5 children. To encourage childbearing, some population owners promised the women slaves their freedom after they had produced 15 children. So just think, these women were promised their freedom if they produced 15 children. 15. So 15 children from one woman, and multiply that. Let's just keep going. Let's kill this. Let's kill all this noise. We gotta kill this. And look a little Phoenix Moon right there. Don't you like Phoenix Moon, family? Let's get it. Let's get it. Let's go. Our masters replied that these women were 2 of the best breeding wenches in all Maryland. Then one was 22 and the other only 19. That the first was already the mother of 7 children. She was 22 years old and she was already a mother of 7 children, and the other of 4. That he had himself seen the children at time he bought their mothers, and that such wenches would be cheap at $1,000 each. But as they were not able to keep up with the game, he would take $1,200 for the 2. So 2 of those women were worth $1,000. Okay? Let's keep going. Young women were often advertised for sale as good breeding stock. To encourage childbearing, some population owners promised women slaves their freedom after they had produced 15 children. One slave trader from Virginia boasted that his successful breeding policies enabled him to sell 6,000 children a year. A year. It has been claimed that plantation owners were often the fathers of slave children. So whenever you hear these pseudo so-called aboriginals say things like, oh, them Africans over there don't look nothing like me, this so-and-so and so don't look nothing like me.
I have 136 in stock, but this should give you an idea of the product. It takes talent to create a strain like this. The breeder must work with colors like an artist. A bit of white here, a bit of black there. Now a touch of red, there a whisper of white, until out comes something which is neither black, nor white, nor red, nor yellow, but an indisputable masterpiece.
That's because, most likely, your ancestors were raped, and those European slave masters' genes was passed down in us. Even some natives, even the Cherokees owned African slaves. So you're looking at a different people. But see me, I acknowledge my African side because that's the side that wasn't given to me by force. That 80% that's still left in me, that wasn't given to me on a plantation like that 10% European or that 6% European or that 5% native. Do you follow me? So this is why I acknowledge that African side of me more, because that other side of me was given to our ancestors by force, by rape. Okay, so let's keep going. It has been claimed that plantation owners were often the fathers of slave children. Harriet Jacobs, a house slave in Eatontown, North Carolina, claimed that when she reached the age of 15, her master, Dr. James Norcom, attempted to have sex with her. My master, Dr. Norton, began to whisper foul words in my ear. Young as I was, I could not remain ignorant of their import. I tried to treat them with indifference or contempt. My master's age, my extreme youth, and the fear that his conduct would be reported to my grandmother made him bear this treatment for many months. He was a crafty man and resorted to many means to accomplish his purposes. Sometimes he had stormy, terrific ways that made his victims tremble. Sometimes he assumed a gentleness that he thought must surely subdue. So basically, he was raping her. He was raping the young lady. Did you hear it? His victims trembled. So the master would rape these women. And these are our primary sources. You gotta have some sources, man. Oladuequiana. Where are your sources? Abos. So, I don't want to hear about this shit no more. I don't want to hear about, how did 350,000 slaves turn into millions. I don't want to hear that, because you sound like a damn idiot. You really sound like a fool. They were breeding our ancestors like chattel. What part don't you understand? You get on here and you call us agents, and you call us this, and you call us that. But you are denying what our ancestors went through. You are denying the rape. You are denying them being over there, coming on them slave ships, at the bottom of those ships. Do you know what you're saying? I don't think you understand what you're saying. Okay? You saying that we was already here. Well, when you say things like that, you make the European sound like Superman. Because how the hell would you being already over here, already on this land, did he make you forget? Did he make you think that somehow you're an African American? This is what you idiots are saying. This is what you so-called aboriginal, so-called indigenous people are saying. Nobody's not claiming that you don't have native in you. This is not what we're saying. Even if you wanted to, explore your native side, that's on you. But when you start saying shit like the slave trade is a hoax, when you start saying shit like we was already over here, then there's a problem. Because you're denying my history, which comes from Africa, which I know comes from Africa. So, once again, you could get that shit out of here. What did we already check? We already checked the 60 minutes DNA bullshit. We got that shit out of here. We already checked Phoenix Moon's fictitious fabrication of her genealogy with them fake natives. We already checked that. We can get that shit out of here. And it's more to come. It's more to come. It's your brother YK The Truth, and I'm out. Peace.